For more than 100 years, an old octagon building and nearby barn have graced the landscape of an area that has been called Shaffers Crossing since 1907. In close proximity to Elk Creek and just south of the current Highway 285, these structures have been a permanent reminder of times past. The octagon actually is an irregular octagon. Its design is a hexagon with the sixth side extended outward to accommodate a stage area, recalling its days as a dance hall. Stories differ as to the origin of this unique structure. A part-time resident of Glen Elk, a cabin resort just south of Shaffers Crossing, stated that her ancestors made reference to this building when they were first developing their resort in 1900. Shaffer descendants, however, thought that their great-grandparents, Samuel and Sarah Shaffer, might have built it sometime after their arrival in 1903. Over the past 11 or 12 decades, the octagon has had a variety of owners, and it has served a multitude of purposes. In 2015, the Krogh Ranch, consisting of 250 acres including the octagon, barn, caretaker's cabin, and ranch house, was purchased by the Archdiocese of Denver. A large retreat center is planned for this area, and a campground has been under consideration to be located near the historic Octagon and Barn. The future of the Octagon and Barn is a concern to many members of the Conifer Pine and Bailey communities. Homestead patents for the Shaffers Crossing area were issued to R. Standring and others in the area beginning in 1873. Little is known about these families other than that the Standrings were murdered in their home around 1900. In 1902, Samuel and Sarah Shaffer purchased a ranch in a small hamlet on Elk Creek, then known as Urmston, Colorado. This settlement had also been known as Belleville and Willowville. The Shaffer family included their 4 youngest sons. Shaffer placed a sign to mark where the stage road crossed Elk Creek and then designated this place as Shaffers Crossing in 1907. The Shaffer Barn, referred to as the Stagecoach Barn in the Shaffer Family Pioneer album, was built by the Shaffers in 1903. The Shaffers developed and expanded their holdings and spent their last years there. In 1915, Sarah and then Samuel passed away. In 1919, Earl Sanger acquired all of the Shaffer holdings, which amounted to over 1,100 acres at that time. For decades, the Shaffers Crossing Ranch ran cattle along Elk Creek. That run ended when developer Ron Lewis, owner of the Buffalo Park Development Company, purchased the property and outlined plans for 88 homes, 180 multifamily housing units, and a 40-space RV park. However, he incurred financial difficulties and his plans stalled. In 2015, the Archdiocese of Denver purchased the ranch for $2.25 million to build a large retreat center. The Octagon building has been used for a variety of purposes over the past 150 years or longer. Although reports of these uses vary, it has been consistently reported that it was a school, a grange, a community center, a dance hall, a church, and a sheep barn. Some accounts have indicated it was also somebody's home at one time. It was a dance hall when the Shaffer family lived there from 1902 to 1915. It was the Urmston School in the 1920s, and the Long family attended school there, according to Donna Long Beck. It was also used as a church after the town church burned down. Isham Jones, who lived from 1894 to 1956, was a famous musician, orchestra leader, and a songwriter during the 1920s to the 1940s. He played the saxophone and bass, but he was best known for the many songs he wrote, including I'll See You in My Dreams, It Had to Be You, and No Greater Love. Isham Jones was perhaps the most famous person to spend time at the crossing. Jones owned several properties near Shaffers Crossing, including a grocery store which he ran on the northeast corner of Shaffers Crossing. Jones and his band played at the Octagon building during the late 1930s and 1940s. A former resident of South Elk Creek Road spoke of attending these dances in this building as a young lady. The octagon is made of dimensional lumber 2x6s, likely milled on site and approximately 30 feet wide with a stage at the south end. The stage is built out adding two sides to create a total of 8. The stage itself is on a rock foundation of sorts and has a wooden floor. The rest of the octagon's floor is dirt at this time, and there appears to be no foundation. The lumber was covered with a brick-patterned tin siding many years ago. There are 4 windows which originally had glass in them, which are boarded up now. The roof on the west side was in very poor condition. As it continues to deteriorate, the inside of the structure was rapidly declining as well. There's a very tall pole in the center and an elaborate truss system. This pole extends through the top towards the sky, perhaps 12 feet or more. The trusses are carefully secured to this sturdy pole. Fairly close to the pole, there's a hole in the ceiling where a stovepipe once was. At the base of the trusses, a flat ceiling of beaver board was added later, according to the date stamped on one of the boards, which indicated the boards were patented or manufactured in 1916. It's these boards that were hand-painted with an attractive floral and nature-type designs. The octagon did have electricity at one time, and the old Christmas lights are still attached around the outside of the structure. The barn is constructed with hand-hewn timbers, tendon joints, and some square nails. It was also built of dimensional lumber, likely milled on site, because it's known that the Shaffers had a sawmill on their property near the barn. The architecture of the octagon is unique. The steeply pitched roof is reminiscent of some old European churches, and the very long pole in the center also resembles many churches of the past. The pole is estimated to be 30 to 40 feet tall. We believe that the octagon was built before 1900. The Methodist Episcopal Church at Shaffers Crossing was said to have been built in 1881. Margaret Bentley, in the upper side of the pie crust, told of the Long family, who had originally homesteaded near Shaffers Crossing in the 1870s. Descendants of these early pioneers still live in the area. Bentley would describe that Rudy Long and others would walk to Shaffers Crossing and dance half the night in the round Grange Hall, singing this song.
When I die, don't bury me at all. Just string my bones and hang 'em in the old Grange Hall. And when the music begins to play, they will begin to sing and sway.
Thanks to Rex Rideout for that rendition of the song. The Octagon building has served many purposes over the last century. While the barn has been a stable, a barn, and a storage area for hay for many years, it currently does not appear that there has been any use of this building for the past couple of decades, and there is currently nothing inside it. Since its nomination, the Octagon building has been stabilized with the help of CPI working with the Archdiocese and volunteers. The roof was stabilized so that deterioration could be stopped. Unfortunately, the barn was damaged further by winds during the winter of 2020 to 2021 and is in desperate need of repair. The Octagon and the Old White Barn are important to this community. Everyone who lives and travels along this part of the 285 corridor knows the Octagon building and may also recognize the old barn. They are a significant part of the landscape and help connect us to the past. These buildings have been there for as long as anyone can remember. Some longtime community members recall stories of their parents or grandparents attending school at the Octagon building, or their grandparents or great-grandparents enjoying the weekly dances so long ago. These buildings represent stability, constancy, and tranquility, which are vitally important in this ever-changing world. The Jefferson County Historical Commission, at its August 2017 meeting, voted unanimously to support a nomination of the Elk Creek Octagon and Barn as a Colorado Preservation, CPI, endangered place. Bonnie and Dick Scudder prepared the nomination, which included responding to answers of 9 questions, submission of representative photographs, and a map indicating the location. Additional documentation included 7 letters of support, including 2 from Shaffer descendants. Reprints of articles published in Historically Jeffco were included as they mentioned and pictured the Octagon and Barn. Prior to submitting the nomination, the Scudders were able to meet with Michael Six, the project manager for the Archdiocese. Michael and the caretaker Justin took them inside the Octagon and Barn and allowed them to take numerous photos, which you have seen during this documentary. The Scudders shared the history that had been assembled with Mr. Six and the caretaker so that the Archdiocese could learn more about these historic structures. Many nominations from around Colorado were submitted and reviewed by CPI. 4 were selected, including the Octagon and Barn. Interviews and on-site filming took place in December of 2017. Jennifer Origo Charles, the executive director of Colorado Preservation, Inc., and Kim Grant, the Endangered Places program director, joined staff from CBS 4, who interviewed the local residents and filmed the structures, as you can see in the following video.
I think he just fit in. He was one of those guys that's just, a pillar in the community, I guess you'd say. Kind of a go-to guy.
That go-to guy was Samuel Shaffer.
He had come into the West in McCook, Nebraska, and he had a implement store and mercantile business there in McCook.
To Ray and Dean Shaffer, Sam was great-granddad. He brought his wife and 11 children to Jefferson County in 1902 to start a ranch at a crossroads along Elk Creek.
They built 3 buildings when they moved here in 1902. One was they called it the Community Hall Dance Hall. The other was this large barn, and the other was the store. He'd always really enjoyed the store keeping, and he really liked people.
It didn't take long before Shaffer's friendly demeanor made a name for him and the town.
It had been named several different things through the years, I guess. He just put out a sign and the name stuck.
Today, the crossroads still carries Shaffer's name, but there's very little left of the ranch. The store is long gone, leaving only the barn and the community hall known as the Octagon to tell Shaffer's story.
My grandfather called it a dance hall and a community center.
So the Shaffer accounts talk about the wild dances they had in there. Well, I've been in there and you couldn't have kicked too wide or jumped too high. It's not that big in there. I guess you could have danced around the pole quite a bit.
Samuel Shaffer died in 1915, and the ranch sold to new owners. The little oddly shaped building carried on the family legacy of bringing together the community.
They would have family dinners, they would have social events. It was a Grange building there until probably the early 40s.
Donna Beck's family has lived in this area for nearly 150 years.
I'm very connected to the history of the area, and to preserve these buildings is of utmost importance to me.
The 2 buildings captured the imagination of new residents as well. Bonnie Scudder and her husband moved here just 24 years ago.
It was always just a very curious building out there in the middle of nowhere. It is made of logs, but on the outside, the white that you can see on it is actually painted tin.
Inside the Octagon, clues to its former glory hang faded from the ceiling.
There's beaver board, sort of pie-shaped beaver board, and somebody has hand-painted beautiful little scenes. The part that you see jutting out in the back on the south side is a stage, and it's elevated a little bit. It served as a church when the Methodist church that was part of this community burned down.
Time and decades of non-use have taken their toll on the structures.
It's just deteriorating very rapidly at this point from the weather.
Plans for new construction have brought a renewed interest in the future of these buildings. The Archdiocese of Denver recently purchased the property and plans to build a retreat center in the valley.
Their main focus right now is building their retreat center and getting all the permissions that they need to proceed with their construction.
The historic buildings aren't in danger of demolition, but the Archdiocese has no plans to use them or restore them either.
They thought that they could probably use the barn as a storage area, so they could make use of that. They weren't really sure what to do with the Octagon house.
Those close to the buildings would like to work with the Archdiocese to at least stabilize the structures.
It's a building that I think a lot of people had a lot of happiness and a lot of very wonderful memories.
They view the proposed development as an opportunity to teach visitors to the area about the local history.
As the Archdiocese develops their retreat center, that will bring more people to the area.
The more the buildings we can preserve, the more it shows the importance of the area to those people who just travel through.
It gives context to where we stand in history.
Ray Shaffer sees the buildings as a reminder of what community is all about.
Today everything's handed to us, and that wasn't the way it was. You built your community in those old days. When we look back, we really appreciate coming to this area and seeing, well, there was roots here. I think that's important while we save it. This is our roots.
When I die, don't bury me at all. Just string my bones and hang 'em in the old Grange Hall. And when the music begins to play, they will begin to sing and sway.